When God separates you from a narcissist, it doesn't feel like a blessing at first. It feels like a storm ripping through the core of your life, pulling apart the pieces you thought you needed, shaking the ground beneath your feet. But listen closely, because buried inside that chaos is a transformation so powerful, so divine, that once you understand it, everything in your journey begins to make sense. God doesn't separate you to break you. He separates you to rebuild you, redirect you, and restore you. And when he pulls you away from a narcissist, he's pulling you away from something that was draining you, diminishing you, and disconnecting you from your true purpose. This separation isn't punishment, it's preparation. And once you begin to see the pattern of what happens afterward, you realize that God was saving you all along. The moment the distance begins, the first thing you feel is confusion. You question why things happened the way they did. You wonder why someone who claimed to care could turn so cold, so distant, so effortlessly detached. But this confusion isn't a sign of weakness. It's the first stage of awakening. God allows that confusion because it forces you to search for answers within yourself rather than in the person who kept hurting you. You begin asking the difficult questions, the ones you avoided while you were busy trying to maintain a broken connection. And slowly, quietly, God starts revealing what you were too blinded by pain to see. He shows you the manipulation, the cycles, the emotional traps, the subtle ways you were made to doubt yourself. It becomes clear each day that this separation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. When God separates you from a narcissist, it is never an act of cruelty, abandonment, or punishment, although in the beginning it may feel exactly like that. It feels like your world has been torn open, like something precious has been ripped away from you without warning. Your heart wrestles with the sudden emptiness, trying to understand why everything collapsed so quickly. But what you don't see at that moment is the divine protection unfolding behind the scenes. What feels like loss is often the first stage of liberation. What feels like heartbreak is the beginning of healing. And what feels like rejection is actually God's redirection. When God removes someone harmful, it is because he sees what you cannot see, hears what you cannot hear, and knows what you do not yet know. He sees conversations you weren't present for, intentions you never noticed, and dangers you would have walked right into. He steps in not to take something from you, but to protect everything good inside you that was being drained, manipulated, or dismantled by the narcissist. You have to understand that narcissistic relationships are spiritually and emotionally dangerous. They pull you away from your identity, from your peace, and often from your connection with God. Over time, you begin to compromise pieces of yourself just to keep the peace, to feel valued, or to avoid conflict. You silence your intuition, you ignore the red flags, you sacrifice your needs, you stay longer than you should, and while you think you are being patient, loving, or loyal, what's really happening is that your spirit is being suffocated. But God watches how much you give, how often you compromise, and how deeply you bend yourself just to hold on to someone who was never meant to stay. And when he sees that your heart is in danger, he steps in, not gently, not slowly, but in ways that force separation. You may think the relationship ended on its own, but often it ended because God intervened before the damage became permanent. Divine protection doesn't always look like protection. Sometimes it looks like heartbreak. Sometimes it looks like betrayal. Sometimes it like distance, confusion, silence, or a sudden ending that makes no sense. But that ending is not random. God allows separation because he knows the narcissist will never stop taking, never stop draining, never stop manipulating. He knows the narcissist will never become the person you hoped they would be. He knows the relationship was built on pain, imbalance, and emotional deception. And he knows that if he doesn't remove you, you will keep giving pieces of yourself away until there is nothing left. So even though it's painful, lonely, and confusing, God allows the separation because he is saving you from a lifetime of emotional destruction and spiritual exhaustion. When God protects you, he doesn't just pull you away, he also blocks access. People who once controlled you suddenly lose their grip. Their words no longer penetrate your heart the same way. Their manipulative pull weakens. Their ability to draw you back slowly dissolves. And even if part of you tries to return, something stops you, a discomfort, a quiet alarm in your spirit, a heaviness that warns you not to go backward. That resistance is God's protection in action. It is his way of saying, this connection is not from me. This person cannot go where I am taking you. Protection also comes in the form of closed doors. You may try to communicate, reconcile, or hold on to the relationship, but everything keeps falling apart. Every attempt meets resistance. Every effort fails. Every path back to that person collapses. This is not coincidence. This is God refusing to let you re-enter what he rescued you from. He knows that if you stay separated long enough, you will heal enough to see the situation clearly. He knows that once clarity comes, you will never want to return to the chaos you once normalized, and so he keeps the door shut even when you emotionally reach for it, because he knows that reopening it would only reopen the wound he is trying to close. Eventually, as time passes, you begin to realize that what you thought was loss was actually deliverance. You begin to understand that God didn't take something valuable away from you. He took something harmful away. He removed what was blocking your growth, your peace, your joy, and your God-given purpose. And when the truth becomes clear, you can finally look back without pain and say, God saved me. I didn't know it then, but he saved me. That realization is the true meaning of divine protection. Understanding that God removes what you would have held on to, heals what you didn't know was hurting, and protects you even when you don't understand the reason. Confusion after separation is not a sign that you made the wrong decision. It is the natural beginning of awakening. When you break away from a narcissist, your mind doesn't instantly understand the truth your spirit already knows. Your heart is still tied to moments of affection, to memories that felt real, to the version of the person you thought they were. You're emotionally attached to the potential you believed in, not the reality you lived. So when God separates you, the first thing you feel is not relief, it's confusion. It's the quiet shock of losing something that, despite its toxicity, became familiar. You question yourself, you question your choices, you even question the signs that pushed you away. But this confusion is not meant to break you. It is meant to wake you up from a cycle you didn't realize was draining your spirit piece by piece. You must understand that in a narcissistic relationship, confusion was already part of your daily life. You lived in a constant tug of war between what you felt and what they made you believe. They blurred the line between love and manipulation, affection and control, passion and pressure. Every time your intuition whispered something was wrong, they convinced you that you were overreacting. Every time your heart felt uneasy, they spun stories to make you doubt your perception. Over time, you learn to second-guess yourself, to question your emotions, to silence your inner voice. So when the separation happens, that same confusion rises to the surface because your mind has been conditioned to distrust your own truth. God allows this post-separation confusion because it becomes the soil in which clarity grows. When everything feels uncertain, you begin searching for answers. You start replaying moments, conversations, and decisions with a new perspective. You look back, not to romanticize, but to understand. Slowly, your mind begins to process the things your heart ignored. You start seeing the patterns, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the silent treatments, the shifting blame, the inconsistency masked as emotional depth. The more you reflect, the more you realize that your confusion isn't coming from losing love. It's coming from losing an illusion. You weren't losing a partner. You were losing the fantasy you built to survive the reality you were in. Confusion is also the stage where your heart begins detoxing from emotional control. When a narcissist leaves your life, your nervous system has to relearn peace, your mind has to relearn stability, your heart has to relearn safety. For so long, your body was conditioned to handle chaos, to walk on eggshells, to anticipate reactions, to brace for emotional shifts. When that chaos suddenly disappears, your system doesn't know how to react. The silence feels loud, the calm feels suspicious. The peace feels uncomfortable, and so you feel confused, wondering whether you made a mistake simply because your body is no longer surviving in fight or flight mode. But this stage is necessary. God needs you to sit in that confusion long enough for it to turn into understanding. If he removed the confusion instantly, you would run back to familiarity, even if that familiarity was destroying you. Confusion slows you down, it keeps you still, it makes you reflect rather than return, and during that stillness, God begins revealing the truth that was hidden by your emotional attachment. Piece by piece, he lifts the veil. Suddenly you remember moments you brushed off. You recall comments that cut deeper than they should have. You recognize red flags that you once excused because you wanted the relationship to work. You begin to see how much of yourself you sacrificed just to keep peace with someone who thrived on your instability. As clarity grows, the confusion begins shifting into something more powerful awareness. You start to understand not just what happened, but why it happened. You see how the narcissist fed on your kindness, your empathy, your loyalty. You recognize how they used your genuine heart as a tool for their own validation. You realize that the love you gave was real, but the love you received was conditional, performative, and strategically timed to keep you from leaving. This understanding becomes the turning point. You no longer feel confused about the separation. You feel grateful. You no longer wonder why God removed them. You see exactly what he was protecting you from. Eventually, the confusion dissolves completely, replaced by a sense of strength you didn't know you had. You stop analyzing every detail. You stop blaming yourself. You stop questioning whether things could have been different. You finally understand that the confusion was never a sign of weakness. It was the final stage of breaking free from manipulation. Without that confusion, you wouldn't have searched for answers. Without searching, you wouldn't have uncovered the truth. Without truth, you wouldn't have healed. And without healing, you wouldn't fully appreciate the separation that God orchestrated for your protection. So the confusion you felt after the separation was not your enemy. It was your beginning. It was the emotional detox, the mental reset, the spiritual unmasking. It was the first step toward clarity, self-awareness, and liberation. And in hindsight, you realize that confusion was the doorway God used to lead you into a truth so powerful that it finally set you free. Rediscovering yourself after being separated from a narcissist is one of the most profound and transformative experiences you will ever go through, not because it happens suddenly, but because it happens quietly, gradually and deeply. When God pulls you away from someone who is draining your soul, He doesn't just remove the person. He begins restoring the parts of you that person tried to erase. In the beginning, you may not notice it. You may feel empty, lost, or unsure of who you really are without that connection, even if it was toxic. This is completely natural because a narcissist doesn't just take your time or your love. They take pieces of your identity, your confidence, your voice, and your self-trust. When God separates you, all of those parts begin to return piece by piece in a way that reshapes you into someone stronger than before. During the relationship, you slowly became disconnected from yourself without realizing it. Narcissists are masters of making you question your worth. They make you feel like your needs are too much, your emotions are overreactions, your boundaries are selfish, and your dreams are unrealistic. You find yourself tolerating things you would have never accepted from anyone else. You shrink your personality, dim your light, silence your opinions, and adjust your behavior just to keep the peace. And the sad part is that you do it so gradually, you don't even notice how far you drift from who you used to be. So when the separation happens, you suddenly find yourself standing alone with the question, who am I now? That question is not a sign of weakness, it is the beginning of rediscovery. God uses that moment as the starting point of rebuilding. You look in the mirror and start recognizing features of yourself you haven't seen in years. Your courage, your sensitivity, your passion, your creativity. You begin to reclaim the parts of you that were buried under emotional manipulation. Your voice starts coming back, your laughter becomes real again, your smile is no longer forced. You realize that the silence, which once felt frightening, is now a space where your true self can breathe again. Rediscovery also shows up in the way you start trusting your intuition again. In the relationship, your instincts were constantly dismissed or invalidated. Every time you felt something was off, the narcissist twisted the story to make you doubt yourself. Over time, you lost trust in your own judgment. But when God separates you, clarity returns. You begin recognizing that your intuition wasn't wrong. You were simply surrounded by someone who needed you to believe it was. As your mind clears, your inner voice grows stronger. You start making decisions without fear. You begin listening to your heart without second-guessing it. You understand that your sensitivity is not a flaw, it is a gift. As this rediscovery continues, something powerful begins happening inside you. You start valuing yourself again. You begin realizing that you deserve respect, consistency, and emotional safety. You understand that your worth doesn't depend on someone else's approval or attention. You stop chasing validation and start embracing self-respect. This shift alone is life-changing because it teaches you boundaries. Boundaries that were impossible to maintain while you were with the narcissist. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to protect your peace without apologizing. You learn that your energy is precious and should not be wasted on people who drain you. You also start reconnecting with things that bring you joy. Maybe it's a hobby you abandoned, a talent you suppressed, or a dream you paused because the narcissist made you feel it wasn't important. Slowly, life begins feeling meaningful again. You realize how much of yourself you had set aside to keep someone else comfortable. Now, with that person gone, you reclaim the space they occupied in your spirit. You fill it with purpose, passion, and growth. You rediscover the beauty of your own presence. One of the most beautiful parts of this rediscovery is when you begin seeing yourself with compassion. You stop blaming yourself for staying too long. You stop hating yourself for ignoring the red flags. You stop punishing yourself for not walking away sooner. Instead, you understand that you were doing your best with the knowledge and emotional strength you had at the time. You see that your loyalty, your kindness, your patience, those were not weaknesses. They were qualities that reflect your heart, not your mistakes. You start appreciating yourself for surviving something that was designed to break you. And as you step further into this rediscovery, something unexpected happens. You begin feeling grateful for the separation, not because the pain disappears instantly, but because you realize that without that painful ending, you would have never found your way back to yourself. You see how God used the separation to return you to your identity, your dignity, and your purpose. Every day, more pieces fall back into place. Your mind grows sharper, your emotions grow healthier, your spirit grows lighter. You become someone who is not only healed but transformed. Rediscovering yourself is not about going back to who you used to be. It's about becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be, the version that the narcissist tried to hide from you. And when you reach that version, you understand why God separated you in the first place, because who you are becoming is far too valuable to be trapped in who you were settling for. One of the most powerful and undeniable things that happens after God separates you from a narcissist is the appearance of blessings you never saw coming. These blessings don't arrive all at once, and they don't always come wrapped in celebration, but they arrive with precision, purpose, and divine timing. At first, you may not recognize them because your heart is still healing, still adjusting to the absence of chaos, still learning to trust the calm. But whether you notice or not, something begins to shift in your environment the moment God removes toxic influence from your life. Opportunities that were once blocked suddenly start opening. Paths that were unclear begin to straighten. People who carry genuine kindness start entering your life, and slowly, you start seeing that everything you lost is being replaced with something healthier, something more stable, something aligned with your destiny. You have to understand that while you were connected to the narcissist, your emotional and spiritual energy was being drained consistently. When you're constantly focused on managing someone else's moods, decoding their behavior, or trying to protect yourself from emotional attacks, you're left with very little energy to invest into your own growth. Your talent stays dormant. Your opportunities pass by unnoticed. Your dreams get dusty on the shelf because you're too exhausted just trying to survive. Narcissists take your attention, your time, your creativity, and your passion, not by accident, but by design. When God separates you, He frees you from this emotional captivity, and the moment your energy is no longer being consumed by chaos, it becomes available for things that actually build your life. Because of this, new blessings begin to appear in places you once felt stuck. You might find yourself reconnecting with dreams you abandoned. You might feel a spark of ambition returning. You might regain the mental clarity needed to make decisions you postponed for years. It's not that these blessings weren't available before, they were simply overshadowed by the emotional weight you were carrying. Toxic connections create spiritual clutter, and clutter blocks blessings. The moment God removes that clutter, space is created for new opportunities to flow in. You also start meeting people who are nothing like the person you left behind. These people treat you with respect, speak with kindness, and value your presence in ways you aren't used to. At first, you may feel suspicious. You may question whether they are genuine. That's normal because your heart is still healing from manipulation. But over time, you begin noticing the difference between someone who wants to use you and someone who wants to uplift you. These new connections are blessings because they remind you of how relationships are supposed to feel: balanced, peaceful, supportive, and mutual. They show you that love does not have to hurt, that loyalty does not have to feel heavy, and that affection does not have to be earned through suffering. Another blessing that arrives after separation is the return of peace. Peace is not something you appreciate fully until you've lived in emotional chaos. Once the narcissist is no longer in your life, you start noticing things that seem small but mean everything. Waking up without anxiety, going through the day without walking on emotional eggshells, resting without waiting for the next conflict, feeling calm in your own home, having the freedom to think clearly. This peace is a blessing because it's not just quietness, it's healing. It's God restoring balance to your spirit, repairing what was damaged, and giving you space to breathe again. Opportunities begin aligning with your life as well. You may find new career paths, educational chances, creative inspiration, financial improvements, or emotional breakthroughs. These opportunities come because your mind and spirit are no longer trapped in survival mode. When you were with the narcissist, your focus was always on them. After the separation, your focus returns to your purpose, and when purpose becomes your priority again, blessings begin aligning naturally. Additionally, one of the greatest blessings is that you develop a heightened sense of discernment. You begin seeing people more clearly. You begin recognizing red flags without ignoring them. You begin understanding your worth deeply and without hesitation. This discernment is a blessing because it protects you from ever falling into the same cycles again. Your past pain becomes your future protection. Your previous mistakes become your wisdom. Your heartbreak becomes your boundary. And the most beautiful blessing of all is the way God positions you for a better future. The separation wasn't meant to leave you broken. It was meant to open the door to a life you couldn't reach while carrying the wrong person. Sometimes God doesn't bless you until after the removal. Because he knows that if he blessed you while the narcissist was still present, they would exploit your growth, sabotage your progress, or take credit for your success. So he waits. He waits until the environment is safe, until your spirit is stronger, until your heart is ready. When the blessings finally come, you begin to realize why the separation had to happen. You see that God wasn't taking anything from you. He was making room for peace, room for clarity, room for purpose, room for healthier connections, room for the life you were meant to live. And once these blessings start unfolding, you no longer question the separation. You recognize that everything you gained after God removed the narcissist was something you could have never accessed while staying attached to what was destroying you. These blessings are the proof that the separation was divine. They are the evidence that God was clearing your path, not causing you pain. They are the signs that your story is being rewritten in your favor. And once you see them, you understand that losing the narcissist was not a loss at all. It was the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. Your spiritual strength growing after God separates you from a narcissist is not something that happens instantly. It unfolds slowly, quietly, and powerfully, like a light returning to a room that had been dim for far too long. When you were caught in the cycle with the narcissist, your spirit was constantly under pressure. Their manipulation, inconsistency, emotional cruelty, and self-centered behavior kept you in a state of emotional survival, pulling you further away from your inner peace and your connection with God. You may not have realized it at the time, but every argument, every silent treatment, every moment of self-doubt was draining you spiritually. You were constantly pouring energy into someone who only took, leaving you depleted, disconnected, and uncertain of your own inner voice. But when God separates you, that spiritual drain begins to heal, and your connection with Him becomes clearer than ever before. At first, the separation feels heavy. The loneliness, the silence, the unanswered questions, all of it feels overwhelming. But in this quietness, something sacred begins to happen. You start hearing God again, not through loud signs or dramatic moments, but through gentle reminders, subtle clarity, and a growing sense of strength you can't explain. Your prayers become more honest, your thoughts become more reflective, your heart becomes more open. Pain has a way of humbling the spirit, and humility opens the door to God's presence. After separation, you begin to feel that presence in ways you couldn't when your mind was consumed by emotional chaos. This spiritual strength grows because you finally have space to hear your own soul without someone else drowning it out. Narcissists thrive on controlling your emotional reality. They want you dependent, insecure, apologetic, and unsure, but God wants the opposite. He wants you strong, confident, peaceful, and rooted in truth. Once the narcissist is removed, God can begin rebuilding you from the inside out. You start to see that the relationship wasn't just emotionally unhealthy, it was spiritually suffocating. You were pouring into a connection that was draining your energy and pulling you away from your purpose. This realization itself is a spiritual awakening, and it becomes the foundation of your new strength. Another part of this spiritual growth is the clarity God gives you. You begin seeing things you didn't see before, not because they weren't there, but because you weren't spiritually aligned enough to recognize them. You see how your intuition warned you long before your mind understood. You see how the relationship pulled you away from your values, your peace, and your identity. You see how God was trying to get your attention through discomfort, conflict, and emotional exhaustion. And once you understand these things, your spirit becomes more discerning. You become more aware of what aligns with your soul and what threatens it. You no longer tolerate emotional manipulation, not because you're angry, but because your spirit recognizes it instantly. You also begin to rely on God more deeply. When you lose something you once fought for, you're forced to anchor yourself in something stronger. You start talking to God more. You start asking for guidance more. You start aligning your decisions with wisdom instead of emotion. This spiritual dependence is not weakness, it's strength. It brings you back to the foundation you lost while trying to hold together a relationship that was never meant to last. And as you lean on God, He fills the empty spaces the narcissist left behind, not with fear or sadness, but with clarity, wisdom, resilience, and peace. Over time, your spiritual strength becomes unshakable. You notice it in the way you respond to challenges. You notice it in your emotional stability. You notice it in your ability to set boundaries, something you struggled with before. You notice it in your newfound peace, which no longer depends on someone else's behavior. You notice it in the way you protect your energy, honor your intuition, and choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. Eventually, you realize that the separation wasn't just about removing the narcissist, it was about restoring your connection to God. The pain pushed you toward Him. The confusion made you seek Him. The healing made you trust him, and the growth made you understand him more deeply. This spiritual awakening becomes one of the most powerful blessings of your journey. You become stronger, wiser, calmer, and more aligned with your life's purpose. You become someone who refuses to return to anything or anyone that threatens your peace, your identity, or your relationship with God. Your spiritual strength becomes the proof that what broke you is actually what built you. What hurt you was what awakened you. And what God removed was what he knew was weakening your soul. Through separation, your spirit didn't die, it rose, it transformed, it became unbreakable. When God separates you from a narcissist, the transformation that follows is not just emotional healing, it is an elevation of your entire being. Separation becomes the starting point of rebirth, a quiet yet powerful transition from who you were under their influence to who you were always meant to be. In the beginning, it doesn't feel like elevation. It feels like loss, like confusion, like a sudden void where intensity once lived. Narcissists create a psychological whirlwind that becomes part of your everyday rhythm. So when God removes them, the silence feels unnatural. But as time passes, you realize that what felt like emptiness was simply clearing the space for transformation. The constant tension, the emotional unpredictability, the cycles of affection and cruelty, they all kept you stuck in survival mode. Once God pulls you out, your spirit can finally breathe again. Slowly, the noise they created fades. The emotional pressure disappears, and something new begins to rise inside you. It is in this rise that you notice change had happening repeatedly again and again. Each day you wake up and find a piece of yourself returning, a layer of strength forming, a deeper understanding quietly unfolding. You begin to realize how much of your identity had been shaped by trying to manage, please, or survive the narcissist. Without their presence, your mind stops running in circles. Your heart stops feeling like it's constantly under inspection. Your emotions stop walking on eggshells. You start recognizing the moments where you dimmed your light, where you sacrificed your joy, where you ignored your intuition just to keep the peace. That awareness becomes a turning point, a catalyst for a new kind of strength, a strength built on clarity, not fear. Transformation also shows up in the way your boundaries evolve. What you once tolerated becomes unacceptable. What you once excused becomes clear manipulation. What you once internalized as your fault now stands exposed as their pattern. You no longer absorb their blame. You no longer take responsibility for their chaos. Instead, you finally see the truth. You were not too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, or too difficult. You were simply someone with a heart, and they were someone who preyed on it. With this realization, your boundaries sharpen naturally. You learn to protect your peace, to say no without guilt, to distance yourself from anyone who resembled the dynamics you escaped. It is not hardness, it is wisdom. God does not separate you just to free you. He separates you to teach you. The elevation continues in your spirit. You start to feel a deeper connection with God because you now understand how intentional his timing was. You see how many moments he tried to warn you, how many red flags he showed you, how many times he whispered to your spirit that something wasn't right. But you also see how he waited patiently for you to become strong enough to walk away. And when you finally did, he covered you emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. That spiritual closeness becomes its own transformation. You learn to trust him more, to hear him clearly, to rely on him deeply. And God begins revealing purpose you couldn't see while entangled with someone who was draining your soul. Transformation becomes elevation when your future begins opening in ways it never could before. New connections feel healthier, new opportunities feel aligned, new insights feel divinely placed. You begin attracting peace instead of chaos, clarity instead of confusion, reciprocity instead of emotional starvation. You realize that the separation wasn't the ending of something meant for you, it was the beginning of something divinely designed. Over and over again, you rise stronger, not because you were never broken, because the breaking became the building. And the most powerful part of this transformation is when the past no longer pulls you. The narcissist loses their emotional power over you, their memory loses its sting, their patterns no longer trigger you. You stop explaining yourself, you stop seeking closure. You stop replaying old conversations. You finally understand that God did not remove them to punish you. He removed them to elevate you. And elevation requires release. What once seemed like loss becomes liberation. What once felt like heartbreak becomes awakening. What once felt like abandonment becomes alignment. This cycle of transformation repeats itself because God doesn't just restore you to where you were before the narcissist. He elevates you beyond anything you thought possible. You rise into a version of yourself that is wiser, calmer, more confident, more spiritually grounded, and more in tune with your divine purpose. And in that elevation, you finally understand why God had to separate you, because what he planned for you was far too powerful to be lived in the shadow of someone who only wanted to dim your light.